Hi, it's Dr. Parikh, and we're looking at overview paragraphs. So these are the last few paragraphs that go into your paper. So at this point, you've got your title page. After that will come your abstract, which is right here. And then you will have on the third page, you'll start with your title, and you'll go right into what I call your on-ramp paragraph, and then you'll start having your headings with the main points of your introduction. You'll have your discussion, and discussion will start with a summary paragraph. We don't do it when we do the outline for the discussion because you haven't done your lit review or your introduction outline at that point. So I wait until you're really solid on what you're going to talk about in your paper, because otherwise you have to keep going back and revising things. After your discussion, you have this discussion summary paragraph right under the heading discussion, and then you have your limitations in future research and your professional applications. And last, you have your conclusion or conclusions. I haven't figured out for sure which way, I don't know that there's a standard for conclusion or conclusions. It is the conclusion section, and it's where you share your conclusions. So I'm okay either way. I have some APA style resources for these sections. For the abstract, I found a couple helpful resources. So abstract, you're going to talk about, this is going to be in some ways similar to your on-ramp paragraph, but it's going to be much more in-depth on findings and whatnot. So you're going to start with, again, a paragraph or so about why this study should exist, or why this paper should exist. Imagine that you're either trying to appeal to the editors and reviewers of a journal. Why should this get published? Or to a reader, why should you read this article? You've searched for articles. You know that the abstract is the first, first you read the title, then you read the abstract, and then you decide whether or not to read the paper. This is also a good time to be thinking about the title of your paper and whether to update it. You want to have your thesis, which is your problem statement or your statement of purpose. And this is something you already wrote in your on-ramp paragraph, so make sure that you are matching the main focus. It shouldn't be an exact word-for-word copy, but it should be pretty similar and use the same keywords. You want to share one or two main findings, so these might be, you might summarize each of your main headings here, or any details that are extremely influential. You don't want to just try to cram your entire paper here. This is one of the places where you help the reader separate out the main details. Honestly, the abstract is a little easier when you're doing a research study because you're focused on sharing the actual findings of the participants and measures and findings of your actual paper. It's harder to cram it all in there, but it's more clear what to talk about. I want to at least see you mention limitations, and you are also welcome to talk about future research or professional applications. One thing to note about the abstract, it's the only place I care about length in your paper. Honestly, if you manage to fit everything I ask you to do into 3 pages, I don't mind at all. If it takes you 9 pages, but it's all really high quality writing and not a bunch of fluff stuck in there, I'm good with that too. In the real world, shorter is usually better. But I find that page numbers tend to distract students from what I want you to focus on. But the abstract is one place where there typically are very firm requirements. APA style says 150 to 250 words is fairly standard, but different things may require different amounts. So depending on what you're submitting for, some require 100 words, some are looking for 300. I submit pretty frequently to a conference that wants a 100-word abstract that will get published for attendees to see to help them decide whether to go to your presentation or not, and a 300-word more in-depth abstract that helps the reviewers decide whether to accept your proposal. So for the same thing, you write 2 different versions for that particular conference. So abstracts, it's very real world to have specific specific word counts that you need to hit, and so I do that here. So it can't be less, or you'll lose points if it's less than 150 or more than 250. When you're formatting, you'll also throw on your keywords, but those aren't terribly important. I care more about the formatting than the words you choose, so you can just do that in your final draft. Discussion summary, this is going to go, again, you'll have your whole introduction, then the heading discussion, this paragraph, and then you'll start with your limitations and future research. So you want to do another statement of purpose, so kind of blending these two a little more tightly. And you'll want to have at least 2 key ideas. At least one of them needs to be integrating different sources, because again, this is not just a bulleted list of main points. This is where you're really pulling things together and showing how things combine. You want at least one main take-home point. You could have another take-home point. Take-home point is meant to be the point you're trying to make, so it doesn't necessarily need to cite a source. Let me clarify here. Cite more than one source. And then your conclusion is going to be somewhat similar. It's some of saying the same thing in different words. So you are still doing this purpose again. And this idea of a take-home point. So you're focusing on kind of the second end of this discussion. And I would say here to also pull out at least one future research idea and one professional application to really emphasize where you want people to go in the future. And I really do recommend looking at your articles. Again, not all of them are going to fit things, but I've spoken in earlier videos about how this particular article does have the discussion section where they're kind of summarizing why did we do this. There's a very clear, in the present study, blah, 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 blah. So a very clear statement of purpose for this study. Let's look at our other one. I genuinely haven't looked at this yet. So discussion. So we see very similar to their first few lines of the paper. They're saying like, okay, there's these series. It seems like they're helpful for education. They're talking about public health efforts. And then ways that medical dramas influence the medical community. Then they're talking about high quality series. This is a pretty big discussion. It feels like it's a little more perhaps a little more of an influence, a little less tight than what I'm used to. But it's also a bit more of an informal study. And I would guess that the larger purpose of this article is not just to do the study, but to also discuss, to really do this sort of informing on how these series can be used. Let's look at the conclusion section of this one just for fun. So here we see in summary, we're the first ones to do this. Tell it a little bit about the findings. If we want to do this, we have to access. So kind of talking about future practice, how to make this better. So following along decently there. Okay, so for this, to do this assignment well, you really have to understand what you've been writing about and be able to pull out the main points. That may mean, it may be an iterative process. Iterative means that it's a cycle that repeats, because as you are, let's say I'm trying to do my integrating idea, and I try to figure out what an integrating idea is, and I realize, I kind of clarify how a couple ideas are related in different parts of the paper. I might move one of those ideas to make it more, to make the organization make more sense. I'm going to be careful to make sure I still have my 2 sources in each paragraph and my 3 sources in each section. but I might move things around a little bit. And so what I'm doing in this summary might affect my introduction structure. I also might realize that I don't have enough integration, and so I might go back to my articles and look for more things that I can add in to get that tighter integration, or even look for a new article. So I'm looking back at what I did in the introduction outline, but I also may revisit that outline based on what I need to do here. It's important that you try to communicate to me the most important parts of your paper to you. If they're especially things like future research and professional applications. Here, for some reason, I've said limitations instead of discussion. It's important for me to know how you really see your paper, because I'm going to use these outlines to create a hypothesis for you. And it's going to start the present study hypothesis. Here's that. And you're going to use this hypothesis that I create to write your present study paragraph and to build your entire research proposal. I create the hypothesis for you for a few reasons. One is that creating a good hypothesis takes a lot of research methodology training, and this is in a research methods course. Another reason is that I want you to write an accurate results section and methodology, and that means having all of the materials you need, including knowing how to use the correct stats to analyze the way that your question is asked, to use good scales that have already been validated that we know work for what you say they're working for. Very few studies just make up some questions and ask them, and those studies usually don't get published or not in very good journals. The vast majority of research uses existing questionnaires or just collects basic information, like this one about house. I don't know that they're really, they're just kind of describing the people. They're not saying anything, this isn't anything earth-shattering. It's not bad, but they're not, for example, measuring people's medical knowledge before and after watching House. Or, their empathy levels. These are things we could do. We could see if people, we could manipulate how much people watch certain shows or ask people how much they have watched certain shows, and then look at changes or differences in actual knowledge and skills and opinions. In this case, it's just kind of interesting, but it's not really, it's not using it as a scale per se. We're not saying that we're measuring anxiety, for example. Because there's a lot that goes into creating scales that we're pretty sure actually measure what they say they're going to measure. I'm going to help define within this hypothesis what's the independent variable and what's the dependent variable, and I'm also going to tell you what scale you're going to use. Again, I reorganize things sometimes, so it might not be exactly where it is right now, but right now if you go into paper templates, it says measures, I might change it to say scales, and right now I've got them alphabetical. So I'll tell you, for example, if you write a lot about anxiety, I might say the dependent variable is going to be anxiety, or scores on a measure of anxiety or something like that, and then the scale to be used I would write out is the GAD-7. Actually, I would write out generalized anxiety disorder 7. I don't think that's actually the technical. I think there's something else here at the end. And when you introduce your scale, the first time you write out the whole thing, and then you put it in parentheses, and then every time you use it after that, you just say the parentheses. Sometimes I do just use the parenthesis or just use the shortened version, and you can go through and see, okay, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. They're all, if it's not going to be obvious in here, I will tell you. The only one that's super tricky is depression, is the patient health questionnaire. And they do that because they want it to not be super obvious what they're asking about, even though the questions are pretty obvious. But that one's used like every time I go for a checkup, my doctor has me like in the waiting room. I complete this depression screening. So I'm going to fill this part in for you. And the way I do that may vary a little bit semester by semester. I'm going to experiment with having a central list, because if there's something you really don't like about your hypothesis, you can reach out to me. You can email me and say, I would like to change it this way, and and tell me what you want to do. I'll take a look at it and I might say, that looks great, fabulous, let's update it. Or I might say, actually, that doesn't quite work because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And I might try to suggest something that's going to work better. It might be that you have to define something more clearly, or that you're adding too many variables. This is designed to be analyzed by a t-test because that's the easiest stats to write up. And so I want you to be able to, in order to do a t-test, you just need one measure, like 2 groups compared on 1 measure. So I am taking a bigger lead in the hypothesis. I did it this past semester before I'm recording this, and it made things a lot easier. Like I said, I think I'm going to experiment with doing a central list, so because sometimes students do want to modify it, and that's fine, and we can do that. But what's really a problem is when students end up with, because we do it section by section, it's really easy to end up with like 3 different research questions in 3 different sections, and that's not great. So I want to help you stay consistent, and that is the most important thing in the research proposal. What I'm looking for most is that consistency, that every section in the paper is built around the same research question. Keep in mind, this hypothesis, we are just getting it established now. It doesn't affect anything for this first paper. So the literature review paper is not going to mention the hypothesis at all. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time to go back and forth and end up with a hypothesis that's going to work well. And this is a really good assignment to do it with because it's an overview. So I'm going to have a really clear understanding of what you see as the main points here. And that'll make it a lot easier for me to come up with a hypothesis that's going to fit with what you've already written, because you're reusing most of your paper to create a new hypothesis. I think that's everything you need for this section. If not, I will create another video and add it on. Take care. Bye-bye.